Welcome to the Books Brothers podcast, where six dudes sit down late at night and use the book we're reading as an excuse to hang out, reflect on life, and hopefully become better men. I'm Adam, aka Flez, and I'll be leading today's episode on chapters 19, 20, and the Postscript of The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. I'm here with
Adam,
Rob, Thomas, Garrett.
All right, let's get into the final chapters of this awesome book. So chapter 19 is titled All Together Now, and the chapter pulls together the key lessons from the book, focusing on how our behavior, emotions, and mindset are more important than technical know-how in money matters. Some of the key lessons from the chapter are to have a personalized financial approach. Everyone's money journey is unique. Patience and long-term thinking. So building wealth takes time and steady effort. It's good to be humble and adaptable and ready to adjust your plans. You really want to avoid extremes, so balance is key, avoiding taking extreme risks, but also avoiding being overly cautious. And then behavior over strategy. So success with money is more about your mindset and habits than having the perfect strategy. So with all that in mind, how has your guys' behavior impacted your financial success more than the strategies you've used?
Yeah, man. Good question. I guess I can get going. I would say, the strategies component is interesting because it is important. So I think, basics of contributing to a 401k, making sure that you're matching it so that you get your full employer's deduction, paying off debt as quickly as you can so that it doesn't compound. Like those types of fundamental strategies have been good for me just in terms of setting up some like financial success. But I think the behavior component, which this book is really about just the psychology of money, but it talks a lot about our behaviors, has been a big impact for me. So I know we've talked about in previous episodes about just living within our means. For me, I think I have shared a part of this book that I'm always looking for opportunities to save. I'm always looking for opportunities to get the best deal. So within that, it comes like research and, making sure that I'm looking into something and trying to get the most bang for my buck. Through the behaviors of not impulse buying, really sleeping on bigger decisions. They say if you're going to make a big decision, you should not get it the first time. You should go there, think about it. And then if you're still thinking about it or doing your research, come back like the next day. So I think that there's some truth in there, but just also being conservative with lifestyle to an extent. I think I'm in the camp of work hard, play hard. So work really hard, budget, get groceries. And then when you do take the trip, it's like spending extra on dinners or extra on the trip is made possible by the sacrifices that you have to make throughout the month or throughout whenever. So I think those are some of the behaviors rather than putting it in low cost index funds or putting it in certain stocks or continuing to raise my 401k allocation that have helped me.
Yeah, that's really good, Rob. I appreciate a lot what you're sharing. And as you were talking there, something that I processed through as you were explaining that is you may not be in a situation where you feel like you can be super strategic in how you save and grow your wealth. You just may not have the financial means to, but you can affect your behavior. You can live in such a way that you're managing your finances well. And as I've kind of mentioned, and I feel like Ruth and I are pretty novice when it comes to, we save, but like we're not really doing a lot of, financially savvy things to grow our money. But I'd like to think that because of our behaviors, the fact that we've, made a strong attempt to pay off debt, that we've made an attempt to live within our living standards, and we're not spending a lot on a lot of things that we shouldn't, that we've enabled ourselves then to strategize. So it's like through that behavior, you then can strategize. So, I think I still feel like I'm very much in the early phases of really thinking through financial strategies. But I'd like to think that the behaviors are there. And I think it's important what you mentioned, Rob, about too, you need to be enjoying yourself too. If you spend all this time thinking about just saving and waiting till one day, working in physical therapy. I remember I had old wealthy patients that worked until they were 75 and then, thought they were going to enjoy their retirement and then had health issues. And I know Thomas talked about the FIRE movement a couple weeks back. And my takeaway from that was that behavior that they had for a while, it almost like crippled them, where they did struggle to then start spending money because they developed this kind of habit.
Yeah. It's kind of comical right now, just with going through this home buying process. I have been on a complete like save mentality for like a decade plus. I would think, Garrett, I was telling you maybe yesterday, but it's like the down payment in the house has always been like in the account as like, that's a down payment. Like I've associated that money as like, that's a down payment. And so when you turn that over or you prepare to turn that over, it's almost like, those like slinkies or whatever that you used to put on stairs. And once it made that like first revolution, then it just kept on going and going by itself. I feel like that is what this process is like. It's just once you kind of start shelving some money out, it just starts going with this process. And so I don't know. It's been interesting to change my short-term mindset from rather than like save for this moment. And now the moment's here. And now it almost seems inauthentic to quickly change it to be like, okay, now is when you spend, but obviously within reason, right?
The only thing I would add is moving the goalposts. I think that behavior kind of in your heart, I think being able to stop playing the comparison game, because when you're keeping up with the Jones, comparing yourself to your peers, your colleagues, your friends, whoever, that's when the temptation rises to make financial decisions more on behavior and supplant any strategies you might have. So you can have all the strategies in the world, but if you're not able to stop moving the goalposts or stop being discontent or making impulse buy after impulse buy after impulse buy, then those strategies will come to nothing. And like Flez said, that's the whole point of this book, the psychology. So I think for me, it has been really processing what behaviors in my heart and my viewpoints about others and myself and my relationship with money. Once I come to grips with that and what I want to be true of my life, that helps at least slow down the goalpost moving, if not stop it entirely. And I also think, and a piece of advice from Scarcity Brain, I think Michael Easter said it, the author, is if you want something like an impulse buy, wait like a week or something and then come back and see if you want it. And most likely you won't want it. So those are like small but powerful behavior ideas to help you make more financially sound decisions.
Yeah, I think it's all about just managing emotions like in a moment, and avoiding impulsive decisions, and then just maintaining discipline, obviously, which looks different for everyone. But I know for me, it's, I've talked about the behavioral things are deferring a lot. And just like getting help with like the strategies aspect, I guess. And then the behavioral stuff is more or less, I don't know, almost taken away because the strategy is in place to prevent the behavior. So, yeah, I don't know. It's like a little different way to look at it.
It's funny because all like you, Garrett, and myself all talked about just that relationship of behavior and strategy, where you can't have strategies if your behavior is not there. And if your behavior is bad, then like you can't strategize. And if you have, if you can control yourself, then you can strategize. And so it's definitely an interesting relationship. It really just comes down to discipline, right? That's what we're talking about. Can you be disciplined to put yourself in a better situation? And again, there's certain people that the concept of strategizing just feels so far off because they can't feel like they can catch up. But I think in that place, there's still strategies you can take on, and I think just mindsets, of how can Rob, and you joke about it, but you're one of the more like financial savvy people that I know in terms of the ways that you've sought ways to save money. And, I'm sure it's done you very well.
Thank you.
I'm sure Marianne would appreciate, though, if you had the AC turned on, though, now.
Well, full disclosure for everyone, we do have the AC running tonight, and we just got internet for the first time.
Oh, snap!
For the first time in 10, 12 years. I don't think I've paid for internet since college, which I don't even remember if we were paying for internet back then. I didn't need it like early on, right out of college. And then when I moved to Kansas City was a Google Fiber hosted city. So they gave it out for free.
So for anyone listening, this has been a continued point of contention is Rob's internet.
All right. Chapter 20. Moving on to chapter 20, which is titled Confessions. Morgan Housel talks about his own financial screw-ups and what he learned from them, reminding us that even the pros can mess up. Some of the key themes from the book are that experts make mistakes too. Even the best in the business can get it wrong sometimes. Learning from your mistakes. So mistakes are part of the game, and learning from them is really what counts. And then emotional decision-making. Emotions can mess with our financial choices, and managing them is crucial. So, that being said, have you ever made a financial decision that you later regretted, and what did you learn from it? I'll point to Adam. I'll let you go first.
I mean, I could probably think of lots of different things, but I'll think of the thing that comes first to my mind. And it's something that, it's one of these things where looking back, it would have seemed smart, but I don't know if in the moment it would have. But we bought our home in 2019, and we refinanced in, I think, 2021 is what I recall. When we refinanced, our interest rate, and Rob, who just bought a home, you're going to hate to hear this, I think our interest rate was 4.2, and I think it's like 2.8 now. And when we refinanced, Ruth was like, let's do a cash out refinance and take some money out because our home had increased in value. And so she was wanting to do a cash out refinance and start like investing in another property or just starting together investment stuff. And for me, it was just like too risky. It just seemed like a risk. And we were still kind of in the COVID times at this point. And so I was discouraging of it. That's one that I would say I regret, because I think it would have helped us in some ways financially, to start kind of growing a little more wealth, like not just having more, changing what we're paying for things, but we'd actually be able to like buy another property and start like renting and get into that. What I learned is to listen to Ruth, because Ruth is a very wise woman, and she is not really a risk taker either. But she, at that time, was thinking that would have been the right option. I think, Garrett, you talked a couple weeks ago about the opportunities that you lost, but it like wasn't a big deal because it was like you lost a gain. You didn't have like a big loss. So mine isn't really like a situation where it was like we actually had a negative effect.
Yeah, the what could have been.
Yeah. And so, I mean, who knows? Maybe it wouldn't have really changed things that much, but it's one that, again, just listening to Ruth more and knowing that she's conservative, we're kind of, that she also is not going to take a risk that's going to put us in a bad spot.
I think all of my experiences or examples are more the ignorant and acts of omission rather than commission, like what you just talked about. Yeah. So there's one example in Denver. Again, you can't really predict a once in a centennial pandemic that will boost housing prices like crazy. But I think of other things, especially in the context of compounding. My first job after crew, well, even during crew, not thinking through enough the value of having a job that had a 401k set aside. And I mentioned that I've invested in my own personal Roth IRA from a young age. So that should be good. That's great. But I think looking back, I can't say I regret my path that I'm on, my journey, but I never did an internship in college. And again, it all worked out. Well, I interned, but not like in business. I worked for my church and I worked on campus. I had summer jobs, but I didn't prepare for life after nonprofit ministry. So my first job after crew, I didn't know what I could and could not negotiate. I was just very ignorant. And their benefits package was very behind the times, I would say. All I remember is the month that I joined was 1 month late from when they start people on your 401k match if you're an employee. So I had to wait a full year, which 8 years later, I'm like, I would have fought that tooth and nail. So I didn't even start like a company 401k period until probably 3 years after college. And when you think of some of that was my personal choice. I decided to work at a nonprofit job that their job position didn't offer that. But then my first job after that, I just didn't pay attention enough or advocate enough for myself or know to advocate enough for myself. And looking back and thinking of compounding, even if it was a few $1,000s, because I didn't make a lot of money at that job. I think I made less than 40 grand, but that's not the point. Like what we've been talking about. It's not about how much you make. It's starting with something and letting it compound. And that's something that looking back, I'm like, yeah, maybe it only would have been a few $1,000s in that 1 year, but that was 8 years ago. That was when I was 24, 25, how much that would compound in the future, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm kind of in that camp too. When I got out of college, I wanted to pay off loans aggressively. And so I know that I wanted as much cash as possible in an effort to do that. But Caterpillar was matching up to 6%, like full 6%. And I remember just putting like 3%, 4%. So I was literally throwing away like 2%, 3% of free money 10, 12 years ago, right? And just the fact of throwing away free money is something I regret. Another like silly thing that I regret is, so when I lived in Texas, I was 5 hours away from Dallas. There were flights to go from Victoria to Dallas for like $100 through like a little economy airline. But I found a car, my current car in Dallas, drove my old car up there. The like AC, I think, had gone out. I didn't get it looked at, but I was like filling it with like refrigerant or whatever to get the AC blowing cold. And I drove it up there to look at this car. And I ended up buying the car. And the most that they were going to give me for my old car was $500. Now, I could have sold my old car for probably $4 to $5 grand. But I was stuck in Dallas and it was like, well, I'm driving away here in a car. And so I sold my car to them for $500 and drove away in my new car. And they got me, man. Like,
Got him.
that was a $4 grand mistake where it was just like, dude, I should have just drove my car back home, booked the $100 flight to come back the next day, and then drove back home in the new car. And it's just like, what was I thinking? So little like inconvenience things where it's like with cars and stuff like that. It's like, if it's an inconvenience, but you're going to save money, thousands of dollars, or make it, inconvenience yourself so that you don't lose that money, was my lesson.
Rob, you were talking about the inconveniencing and of money and stuff. And I remember whenever our AC went out, I like jokingly told, so our AC went out during when we had Daphne. So we were at the hospital when our AC went out. So it was like mid-July, early July. And I remember like joking with the guy. I was like, I'll give you $30,000 to fix this AC. I was joking, but it's funny how like you get these extreme scenarios, and I wouldn't have really done that, but that was how I felt. It's like, I'm about to bring home a 2-day-old baby and my house is currently 94 degrees.
I'll go bankrupt.
Yeah. Because either way, if I don't do that, then my wife is going to kill me. And so might as well spend the money, right?
Speaking of wife killing you, mine almost did when I made a poor financial decision and bought an entire home gym.
How much was that home gym, Flez?
Dude, I don't even want to tell you that. I'm not even
Was
saying.
it like 20 grand?
No, but
it was enough to have to put my life in danger.
It was enough. Yeah. Hey, the thought was good though. The thought was being home to be home to whenever, if we were going to have people, little ones. I don't want to be at the gym all the time, but yeah, that was silly. What did I learn from that? Well, not do that again. if I ever get married again.
Sometimes it's just that simple, isn't it?
Yeah, just don't do that again.
Stop
it's like that. What's that movie quote? Baker Mayfield, I feel like, quoted it. It's like, sometimes I think to myself, would a dumb person do that? And if so, I try to not do that thing. Or something like
that. Hey, man, overconfidence and greed, that'll get you.
I think what we're hitting on, though, is a couple kind of takeaways. If, for our audience, I know a lot of people who tune in and listen are our age, but regardless of your age, I think there's like a couple competing thoughts. Is the story of when we were younger, right out of college. Sometimes there are sacrifices that are worthy to be made for long-term gains. So matching that 401k, that extra 3% would hurt out of your literal paycheck, but that free money you're leaving on the table that can compound, can you afford to eat out once or twice less per month? Or can you afford a slightly smaller apartment or whatever? But then there's the other side of it where, man, I'm going to have to spend more money on an airplane ticket than driving and paying for gas. But the long-term effect is, I could sell my car for more value. It's not always black and white. What some short-term present decisions can have longer-term effects. And it takes wisdom. It takes discernment. And it's not always, there's a lot of gray in between.
Yeah. And you learn, right? Like that's kind of one of the takeaways from all of this is
absolutely
learning from mistakes.
Yep. You'll figure that out over time.
Yep.
Let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors.
Do your feet just stank after a long day that those dogs are barking? Do you need to air those puppies out midday, but are too afraid of the rank stank? Now introducing Cologne Socks. Cologne Socks follow a patented scent release process upon the presence of foul feet odor or toe jam. Cologne Socks keep your feet and socks fresh for up to 12 hours. Now introducing scents of mahogany teakwood, barbecue, and older spices. Why remain self-conscious about your stinky feet when you can air them out for others to adore? Cologne Socks. Indulge in the fresh scent of freedom.
And now back to the show.
And moving on to the postscript, which is titled A Brief History of Why the U.S. Consumer Thinks the Way They Do. I thought this chapter was really interesting. It talked about all the historical events and culture and have shaped how Americans think about and handle money. Like the Great Depression made folks super cautious with money, and then post-war boom brought prosperity and a positive outlook. And then the 70s and stagflation created economic uncertainty. And then the 80s and 90s boom encouraged optimism and risk-taking. And then we had the 2008 financial crisis, which made millennials more cautious and skeptical. And I just thought that the generational differences was interesting. So different experiences shape how each generation handles money. And then the difference in good cultural shifts, so changes in society and technology, how those play a role. And then, so do you guys think, are there any historical events that have shaped your own financial behavior, and how?
I have to admit, I love watching documentaries and stuff about the financial crisis in 2008, sort of like people like watching apocalyptic movies. I feel like it's kind of an obsession that shouldn't be an obsession, but it's like watching a train wreck. And then when you watch it, you just expect that it's going to continue to happen like every other year.
Like The Big Short, isn't that one of them? That's actually a really good movie.
Yeah, The Big Short. That's what it's all about. But yeah, like the kind of the pessimism I feel like we've talked about, that's hard for me to shake as a millennial, just based on the stuff that we've seen, the 2000 bubble, the crisis with homes in 2008, the pandemic. It just kind of feels like every few years you should watch out, even though, as we've learned in this book, the long-term history is that things keep going up.
Yeah. Do you guys like remember it being bad in 08, 09?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think maybe controversially, I think we were at an interesting point because, I mean, so we all graduated high school in like 09, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, I mean, it could obviously affect you if you had family that were affected and stuff, but I remember feeling pretty insulated, and we were kind of in a weird spot too where it didn't make a huge difference for us personally. I remember, so my brother's 4 years older, and I remember years and years later thinking, my brother would have been in the time, he'd have graduated from college in around probably 2010, 2011. And it's like, he would have been in a great time to buy a house. And it's something that I've just thought about. But I mean, for me and my family, I don't think it affected us a ton.
I dated a girl that her family lost their house, and it was a really big deal for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we graduated in 09, like you were saying, which maybe this kind of goes back to one of the first chapters when it was like, well, if you grew up in this era, then the stock market would have been like, you don't put your money there. But if you grew up, well, I think it was like 8-10 years later, it's like the stock market is all you know, and it's been good. And I feel like, I don't know, this is a thought I'm just having, but it's like we almost were lucky that we went to college during that time so that the next 4 years, like imagine if we were coming out of college at that time, maybe our financial path would be a lot different right out of college, entering the workforce in 2009 versus 2013. It's interesting. I was golfing with a buddy the other day too, and it's like, I know a guy that literally right when COVID was happening and the stock market was falling, it's buy low, sell high. And he got in literally like that was his cue. And it's like every time it starts doing something crazy going down, that's the time he buys. And I mean, that's really the time to buy. It's hard to buy during that time. But yeah, I mean, like Warren Buffett says, if you believe in America, if you believe that America will continue to progress, then get in regardless, but especially when it's going down. Because history says it'll always, or it continues to go up.
Yeah, I think one of the most impactful statements in this book is the question, do you wake up every day thinking the average person tries to make things better or tries to destroy everything? And I mean, I have a lot of faith in people as a whole, so that really made me realize I have a overly pessimistic view on the projection of where things are going overall than I should have, because I do believe almost everybody's waking up trying to do the right things.
I'll just briefly say COVID, I think, has really impacted me with being very conservative, mainly with our giving, to be honest. As a percentage of our income, we don't give as much as we used to. I've shared before, I think some of it has to do with we have kids now and a mortgage, and there's other financial responsibilities. But I also think part of it too is just the last few years, it was, man, if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. And wanting to hunker down or be overly conservative on the safe side in case there's some variability that comes into play, then all right, we have a little extra in the budget, things like that. And I think COVID has, because of inflation, things like that, I've become a lot more fiscally like very thrifty.
I mean, I feel like you can't talk about big financial changes that have occurred in our lifetime and not talk about COVID. It obviously has played a huge role in buying habits and costs of things in general.
It makes me wonder what the folks getting out of college now that, they were in college during COVID, or maybe the kids that graduated high school during COVID, they are definitely going to have a different outlook getting into the job market where it's really hard to get a job right now. Just kind of totally different than really a lot of the generations we hit on here. Also, they're shifting all their spending towards different goals than I feel like maybe we had getting out of school, with everyone thinking, hey, I can still buy a house. That's affordable enough. I'm going to go for that. I don't really know if that's something the 20-something college graduate really thinks is possible for them right this minute.
I will say I have a coworker who's 22 and he is buying a house. Blows my mind. I can't imagine having a house at 22.
Good for him. That's awesome.
Hopefully he's not super house poor, though. That's the scary part.
Go back to the earlier regret question. Is not
no regrets.
No regrets.
Regrets, yeah.
A condo or a townhome sooner.
Likewise.
I don't know if I'll get in to buy anything anytime soon. I feel like my situation is probably different. I mean, Thomas's situation is different. Oh, it's crazy how different all of our situations are.
Renting has a place too, man. If you just want to save and not worry about variable expenses and just pay your rent and be done.
Just be a 33-year-old bachelor, a single 33-year-old bachelor that's handsome, has a good job,
has a cute dog,
free on Friday night,
average size,
has a cute dog,
average size dog,
likes to hike.
His thumbs don't look that weird.
Godfather.
Nice dog.
There's actually a surgery that you can have now to have your thumbs. They actually break your thumb and then extend it.
We'll include a picture of Adam's thumb in the show notes.
So yeah, just wrapping up, I think some final summary thoughts, I guess, to get a better handle on your financial behaviors, just to do a lot of self-reflection, set clear goals, educating yourself, creating a budget, building an emergency fund, and then staying patient and seeking balance. And then that being said, what are some of the biggest takeaways you guys have from the book? How can you apply those to your lives?
I think the biggest one for me is just slow and steady is going to win the race. I've been following some accounts as well. And there's this one guy that he posts some additional things that the Ramsey folks post too. And it's just the power of compounding over time, the importance of budgeting, like you said, Flez. I think some of those just behavioral lifestyle things are going to translate the most success over 30 years, and not to try to beat the market. Trying to beat the market is only going to be more risky. You're likely going to lose in the end. It's not worth the risk. Slow and steady wins the race over time is kind of the biggest lesson that I've learned.
I'd say a lot of this stuff, especially behaviorally, is not at all intuitive. And I feel like a lot of the risk tolerance stuff that he talked about made me want to take more risks than I'm usually comfortable with, because I have listened to a lot of the more pessimistic news and projected that out in my mind as the reality of what's going to happen, instead of looking at things from more of a mathematical, probabilistic perspective, which I think is more logical. But we tend to fall back into the same stories that are told and sensationalized every single year. Every single year, somebody wants to promote some story of destruction for everything, which prevents people from taking the proper amount of risk so that they can get that slow and steady return like Rob mentioned. So I think, just setting it and forgetting it, being happy with the amount of risk you're taking and knowing the potential consequences and the upsides is really what it's all about. And it's like fitness. It's every person has their own journey. So don't try to compare yourself to everybody else's situation.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I for one, really appreciated the author's approach on this book. I think that Morgan Housel did a great job. I really enjoyed that he shared his own experience at the end. You definitely see a humility in him as a writer, which I really appreciate. I feel like one of my biggest pet peeves when I'm reading a book is when the writer comes across as arrogant. So I really appreciate that from him. I think this category of book, personal finance, has been a category that I've really stayed away from a lot in the past. And I think that this book definitely opened my eyes and interest in a little bit more. As I mentioned a lot in the past, I don't feel like I've done a lot personally to seek ways to grow our, quote unquote wealth. But I think that this sparked my interest to take simpler steps. I think you really simplified it. So take simple steps as well as continue to learn more and grow more in this category. Honestly, for me, this is probably one of my favorite books I've read this so far this year. I'd say it's a top 3 for sure.
Stalin, real quick, why have you shied away from finance books?
I think they've been intimidating. I think that I like to read stuff that interests me, or maybe even stuff that I know more about, and learn about those kind of things. And so I think maybe my approach with learning has been strengthen the strengths and not so much to work on the weaknesses. And so I think that with that, I don't feel super competent when it comes to personal finances. Feel like we're smart and we maintain a budget, but have we done things that have, long-term can affect us or that kind of thing? I don't think we've done as much as I would like.
I think my biggest takeaway, I liked this book a lot because it was less about strategies, obviously more about behavior. And I feel like I can relate to that better for whatever reason. I'm just like you, Adam. My interests don't push me to learning more about the strategies of finance. I don't know why. I wish I had the knowledge and all that. It just sounds so boring to me, to be honest. I'm just being honest. And I tend to only really put my attention on things that I'm extremely interested in. But the behavioral and mindset aspect of the book is why I liked this book a lot. And it could maybe more interested in kind of looking into some other stuff. Yeah, just talking about impulse control and all that. That's all those kinds of things are why I like this book. It's just like I said, all the behavioral aspect and how that's really the most important thing. Because you can have all the best strategies in place, but if you have poor decision making and behaviors, then it doesn't really matter in the end.
Realistic, not rational. Realistic.
I would just add being gracious with yourself. For me, I can be a perfectionist. So you literally, I know that you can't tell the future, but when you miss out on an opportunity, I can get down on myself or something like that. Or, oh man, I should have done this or pursued this thing. And reading all these different examples of based on what generation you're born into is going to impact your views in one way or another. You're never going to get everything right. And each generation, we've made it thus far. So having a more optimistic view, like Thomas shared, combined with just having grace, setting those baseline budgets, patience, live within your means, having an optimistic view, I think it's going to be okay kind of mindset. That's probably a big takeaway for me.
All right, that wraps up another book. We're really excited about our next book, The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. Matt, you recommended this book to us. What gets you excited about reading this next?
Yeah, like you said, our next book is called The Anxious Generation, written by Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt is an American social psychologist and a New York Times bestselling author. And his main areas of study are the psychology of morality and moral emotions. What gets me excited about The Anxious Generation is to dive into the epidemic of mental illness from the use of technology. The book discusses how the shift in kids' energy and attention from a physical world to a virtual world has been disastrous. Technology has changed over the last 40 years or so. Since the early 2010s, rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm, and suicide rose sharply, more than doubling in some measures. The author explores why this happened and recommends action steps for parents, teachers, schools, tech companies, and governments that they can take to end this epidemic of child illness. While this book focuses mostly on childhood, I think we will look at the impact it has had on us as men and how it's affected our own lives. Some of us are parents of young children, so I am personally very interested in learning the issues that come from technology and how to combat it, handle situations, and have knowledge and tools for how it will affect my own kids. So we're excited to explore this book with you. Grab yourself a copy and follow along with us.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Books Brothers podcast. We will be taking the month of July off, but for our next episode, we will be starting the book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Go ahead and get the book and start reading. If you have enjoyed listening or benefited from our conversation, please subscribe, give us a review, and share with a friend that you want to connect with. Lastly, we would love to hear your thoughts. You can reach us by email at connect@booksbrotherspodcast.com or on Instagram @booksbrotherspodcast. Until August, read, reflect, and connect.